What's up, everybody? My name is Daniel Hearn from Hard Knocks Talks. I am happy to be here today in partnership with the Office of One Health and Wellness at the University of Saskatchewan to bring education to St. John Ambulance therapy dog teams volunteering in our community and others as well. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis people in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Today's speaker is Nancy Poole, and she is going to be speaking about therapy dog program participant diversity and inclusion. Let's bring her in. Hey, Nancy, how are you?
Hi, I'm great.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you do the work you do before we get started?
Sure. So, I work as a researcher on girls and women's health. I lead a Center of Excellence for Women's Health that's based at BC Women's Hospital in Vancouver. And, I have really had a lot of great opportunities with organizations all across Canada to teach a bit about gender issues, about being trauma informed, and lots of other topics that we'll end up talking about today. And it's been such a pleasure to follow the pause stress group and the therapy dog groups online. I've had such a great opportunity to learn more and be a part of a couple of the research teams with Colleen Dell about the benefits of therapy dogs. So, really happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, my friend, the floor is yours.
So, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to explore what we're learning about the many aspects of diversity and how they interact and the implications for the work of therapy dog handlers. We're going to consider two aspects of diversity, gender and culture in particular, as examples of where we can improve our response to diversity, and identify how words matter in promoting safety and trustworthiness and inclusion, and identify some common strategies for attending to diversity, gender equity, cultural responsiveness, and inclusion. It's a lot of words, and these are complex ideas, so I hope you enjoy the ride. So, in a lot of fields where a service is often, and I feel like you as therapy dog handlers are very much, and your dogs are very much offering a service. And, in these many fields, here's some of the principles that have been at the core of good practice: being gender informed and trauma informed and reducing harms and being equity oriented and culturally safe and empowering. So today, as we think about diversity, the focus will be on two of these common principles: being gender informed and being culturally safe. So let's get started. So there are so many ways in which we can be diverse. And I've included some here. And, you may recognize many more than these ones on the screen. But all of these are aspects of diversity, and they all kind of have their own cultures that go with them as well. And we'll talk a bit about that as we go along. But the unfortunate thing in our society, I think, is that there's these processes are also connected to diversity. Things like racism and sexism and ableism and stigmatization, marginalization. You get the picture, right? So I think as we talk about inclusion, we also have to recognize that not only do we have to understand the aspects of diversity, but we have to be watching for whether any of these processes are also interfering in the many settings that we might be going to. Like it could be an addiction treatment center, prison, or an emergency department, or wherever you're doing your work, that both you want to be thinking about people's diverse identities. And also, you need to be concerned about how some of these processes may be in play. And, obviously, you're not out to fix the entire world, but you need to be conscious of these things and be thinking about your role in promoting equity and inclusion. So, we're going to start with the idea of gender and being gender informed. And, that's the area where I do most of my work. And here's a bit of a picture about gender. And, I think of late, a lot of people are thinking that gender is really about gender identity because that's the way it's used most often. But it's also important to recognize that there are gender roles, there's gender relations, and there's the way institutions handle gender, as well as our individual connection to gender and our feelings of congruence with the sex that we were born with, and then now how we perceive our gender. So it's complicated, gender as a concept. And if to make it even more complicated, all these components interact with each other and intersect with other aspects of diversity. So lots to think about. So let's take a little journey across a couple of genders and think about it. One of the genders are, of course, girls and women. And, so we can be thinking about how all the different roles and relations apply with girls and women, and how much we sort of stay within what societies expect of us as girls and women, and think about all the good parts of it, like mothering and these happy women talking together, but also some of the challenges related to it in terms of how girls are supposed to look and behave, etc. And of course, I had to put a picture in of the beautiful Annabelle, who liked to dress up as a girl, oftentimes with a tutu and whatever else. And here she is in an adorable little dress. But you can see that how gender is a part of how we see girls and women, and how we identify with gender may be stronger or less strong than in other cases. And we'll talk a bit more about what that might mean for you in your interactions with girls and in the context of your work as therapy dog handlers. But let's talk a bit about boys and men for a moment. And, one of the things that I wanted to stress with this slide is that the way we see and have norms change over time, and the expectation of boys and men have changed over time. And this example from the YWC Vancouver's Culture Shift project shows how Superman was seen in dolls in the 1970s and then in 2014. And you can really see this sort of hyper masculinization that has happened over time, that really affects boys and men and the way they act in society. Also, I think one of the things we've really started to notice is how important it is to recognize that it's not only girls and women who suffer trauma and violence, but really thinking about boys and men as well. And that's something you're likely to see in your interactions when you take the dogs into various settings, like a mental health setting or whatever, is to really recognize that boys and men are there in ways that are, dealing with their particular experience of trauma and their pain and suffering as well. And of course, always to mention that the therapy dogs also have gender or sex and we ascribe gender to them, and that may be part of your interactions, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. Now, these pictures of the wonderful therapy dogs, many of which you will probably recognize, do come from therapydogs.ca, and I hope I've remembered to put the acknowledgement of that everywhere, but if I haven't, please know that that wonderful pictures of these amazing creatures are from. Now we have a whole new world, a welcome world that is more gender diverse. So we have so many other forms of, gender identity: transgender, gender diverse, non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender queer, gender fluid, two-spirit. There's so many different ways in which people are seeing their genders, and opening the conversation to maybe change some of those norms about gender and stereotypes, etc. And I think it's a welcome change, but it's complicated for us all as we navigate this new world where there's way more genders involved. So you're not expected to know all these things as you go in to the very settings that you're going into. And of course, the dogs don't care about what gender somebody is. But it is something that I think you're going to encounter more over time and really have to fold into your interactions. So let's talk about what that might look like. One other thing I just wanted to add in before we move on to talk a bit about gender and in your interactions is this area of sexual orientation. And I think oftentimes gender and sexual orientation are confused and conflated, especially since they're often grouped in those, terms like LGBTQ plus, etc. But sexual orientation is who you are attracted to. And people of all genders have sexual orientation. And that, some of the sexual orientations that are common are lesbian or gay or bisexual or queer or pansexual or asexual. And, this is another whole aspect of diversity beyond gender that, as I said, are often confused and mixed up, but are also important for us to know a bit about. So, gender inclusive language. Sometimes gender diverse people may signal their gender identity expression with pronouns by including after their name a pronoun such as they, she, or they, their, as opposed to what, a person who is a woman might just be she, her, a person who's a man might be he, him, or he, his. The signaling of gender identity expression may be saying that people who are gender diverse signal with different pronouns, and they may encourage others to identify, their pronouns too. Now, it may not come up in your interactions because you may not be likely to use a pronoun, but you may notice that some people ask about the use of pronouns. there's another aspect of signaling gender inclusiveness by some people or organizations that you work with may encourage the use of gender neutral terms, like calling people individuals. So that it's recognized that not all of those of that in that particular group may identify as women or men. So, but others encourage the use of gender inclusive or gender additive terms rather than gender neutral terms. And so they may add in pregnant women and gender diverse individuals. So again, it's recognized that not all those people who are pregnant will identify as women. But those additive terms can really make a difference. So all groups are recognized and responded to, and we're not making assumptions or being generic. So another whole aspect to it. So let's think about how gender might matter in some of the interactions in settings that you go into may matter. And, I'm just using an example about men here because I have edited this book about being trauma informed, and some great men wrote a chapter about what it might mean to take into account the specific relationship to trauma and trauma informed practice that men may have. So it may not be that easy for men to feel safe and identify with the fact that they've had experience, and they may not find it as easy to be in that place of recognizing powerlessness. And they may need to hear offers of collaboration more often than girls and women may, and may really need to be acknowledged for the relational strengths that they do have, and the expression of emotions when they do express what they're feeling. So I just think it's an interesting way of noting that how gender matters and how gender may matter in the particular people you're seeing who are anxious. And therefore, for you to be able to sit in the place, you're not doing therapy of yourself, but to be able to recognize how gender may be out in the situation. And of course, letting the dogs do their magic, which just allows them to sit with and not have expectations. I just want to say one more thing around the processes that surround gender roles and norms and identity. And I think it can be really a part of recognizing gender inequity in the settings that you and the dogs work in. And really thinking about, how you're noticing and, to the extent that you have the opportunity to be promoting gender equity in the context of your work. And this is just an example here where people noticed how gender norms really create the situation of harm or victimization for boys who are not perceived as masculine enough, girls who are not perceived as feminine enough, or girls whose bodies mature before their peers, etc. And so you can see what this report is talking about is a bit about how gender norms are kind of policed or punished or, bullied if you don't conform to the gender norms that are in existence. And, as I said, we're at a wonderful point in time where some of the traditional stereotypes and norms are really being shifted. And so hopefully some of these bullying ways may also. So just going to reflect for a moment with you about how might gender norms and gender identity and processes like discrimination matter in your work. And I think that's what understanding diversity and inclusion is all about, is you taking the time to ask yourself a question like that, and to be recognizing that part of your work is to be curious and to be noticing and aware. So, about how might the dogs play a part? I was thinking that one of the ways might be that if you think that gender inclusion is important in the context you're in, you might think about introducing the dog by mentioning the sex or gender of the dog. That might be a really helpful way of saying, of signaling that you're aware of that. On the other hand, it may not be appropriate to introduce the dog by the sex or gender, and you may not be certain that that will be welcome. So you might also think about asking the person if they wish to know more about the dog. Would you like to know the dog's age? Would you like to know the dog's sex? What the dog likes to do, etc. So it allows the person to navigate the moment and to ask about the sex rather than you introducing it right up, if that's a bit of a tender point. So I just think dogs are a great way of being a part of gender inclusion, right? It gives you a chance to, because we so often talk about dogs and often ask, oh, is your dog a girl or a boy? We often do that in our interactions about dogs. And so it could be a really wonderful way of bringing it into the conversation, creating the space for it to be in the conversation, one or the other. Um, it may be that you are uncertain about a person's gender, and you may want to open the opportunity for them to identify their gender. And I've just used my example here of my name's Nancy, my cat's name is Scout, and what would you like to call me? What would you like me to call you? So that gives them the chance to signal, like, my name's John, even though that person may be presenting as more in a feminine way. It gives them the opportunity to identify how they want to be identified in relation to their gender. So lots of interesting opportunities that can be opened up in a very natural way for you. And I think you, as therapy dog handlers, have a wonderful opportunity to be able to be part of inclusion of all genders as you're in these interactions. So it hopefully will feel like a really natural thing. Okay, so let's run through the same process around culture and being culturally humble and promoting cultural safety. So this will be our second example. So cultural identities are really complex too. Like, you think these are common things because they're in our language, but they're actually, really complex concepts. And we belong to a lot of different cultural groups that influence our values and our beliefs and our behaviors. And, you know, we develop our cultural identities based on the influences of all these groups. So, you've got the culture of being therapy dog handlers. You've got the culture of being um, from a rural um, part of Saskatchewan or not. Or you have, all different other, you may have the culture of being belong to a spiritual group, or you may have the culture of being Indigenous or Chinese or Samoan or whatever. So there's so many ways in which we're millennials, another subculture, right? So, it's an ongoing process because we walk through life, we move to different situations, and are exposed to a whole bunch of different beliefs and values. And some of them we may adopt. That weren't a part of our original upbringing, like gender, for instance. So you may at some point identify with being transgender. That wasn't a part of where you started, but becomes a sort of a form of culture identity. And the transgender culture folks will tell you that it's an interesting subculture for sure. So let's think about using Indigenous identity as an example and consider what we mean by these things. I'm going to focus on culture humility and cultural safety. But I put pictures of all these different dogs from different kind of dog cultures or dog breeds or species, etc., as an example of, even though they're all dogs, they actually are, have really unique aspects to whether they're an Alaskan Husky or spaniel or whatever. And we recognize when we see these dogs that they have a particular range of things that are associated with that breed. And I think that's a bit like understanding Indigenous cultures and other cultures as well, is recognizing there are some unique things and learning a bit more of, so that we can really sit with and exchange with respect what we know. So the culture humility, I think, is the really important thing for you to get. It's a process of self-reflection to understand personal and systemic biases and to develop and maintain respectful processes and relationships based on trust, mutual trust. So it involves humbly acknowledging oneself as a learner about another culture when it comes to understanding another's experience. So humility and being active as a learner is so key here. Now, when health professionals engage with First Nations people from a place of cultural humility, they're helping to create a safer healthcare environment where individuals feel respected. And you're often entering environments that are healthcare oriented. And I think that concept that First Nations people have made about respect is super important here, because First Nations people may have had a really unfortunate experience with, services that they're accessing in the past. There may have been bias and racism, discrimination. And I think it's really important for us to come with this humility that we are learning and we want to understand and respect and exchange who we are with that sense of mutuality. So when we do that, this cultural safety is the outcome that is based on respectful engagement and strives to address the sort of power imbalances that are inherent when one culture is been more discriminated than another. So we want to make the environment free of racism and discrimination, and where people feel safe. And, that's all about relationship. And, you and the dogs are more of sitting with than actually doing a healthcare interaction like the First Nations Health Authority is describing. But I think the elements are the same of really trying to bring a cultural humility into our work, and being aware of other cultures, being aware of our own culture and how those are coming into play. So, all of this description of cultural humility and cultural safety comes from a great booklet created by the First Nations Health Authority here in BC called It Starts With Me, and Creating a Climate for Change. I really recommend having a look at that if you want to. But they see it as a lifelong process of self-reflection and self critique to understand our own biases and develop and maintain respectful partnerships that are based on mutual trust. So, we're not expected to be cultural or gender experts. Really, humility is about being open to learning and comfortable starting with what we don't know. So they really have a vision for, respect, understanding, and reciprocal accountability. And I think that is just so important. And they see that as resetting the balance of power. And, I think that's also what dogs do so well is they're not in a power relationship, and they cut through um, that by just sitting with and not caring. But as the handlers, we need to be sensitive and notice when there's a lack of safety, and to really come forth with strategies for mutuality, respect, etc. So yeah, really wanting to talk as well beyond First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultures. There's a lot of other ways to be that we may need to be humble and create safety, whether that's around disability or age or homelessness or income or language or faith or immigration, you name it. There are so many ways in which we can notice different cultures, and to be humble and curious and approaching it rather than avoiding it. So, I was just thinking that one of the ways that dog handlers can really be thinking about culture and noticing culture in your interactions were through, things like hand gestures, body language, eye contact, etc. And so, like in some cultures, eye contact is seen as disrespectful, and in others, it signifies honesty. And so I think this is what you're constantly having to navigate as dog handlers, is to be thinking about um, when someone doesn't make eye contact with you, what assumptions are you making? Are these things that are about culture, or are they anxiety, or both, etc.? And so it's really a matter of you taking the cues about that and respecting how the person wants to be seen. And I think this is something that is really complex, and your work is complex in that sense. But we'll make mistakes, we'll learn from them, and we can always just acknowledge with humility what, oh, I didn't notice that in my culture. That's it's really different. So no disrespect meant, etc. Another way of culture being seen in interactions can be around time and around people's orientation towards time. And uh, for some, schedules and appointments are a priority, and for others, it's more about what's happening in the moment. Some stress punctuality and lateness a sign of disrespect, and in others, when people are don't mind if people are late, and the norm is, just an approximation. Now that may not come into your situation, but it may. It may, and I just think that we need to be self-reflective about whether other people's orientation towards time bother us, and is that something that is a cultural difference that we need to respect. And sometimes I think, um, being late can also be a bit of a sign of resistance, and that's a healthy one, that you can give yourself some space if you're nervous about whether the other person's going to be respectful. So you create this situation of being late to navigate that a bit, to give yourself some power if you think the relationship is going to be a power over one. So, it just causes us to think about all these things that in our culture may be offensive, but actually may be a sign of strength and creating safety for each other. And so we need to figure out how to do all this, which is complicated, and sometimes we may wish we were the dogs where the complexity wasn't there. But as the handlers, I think, it gives you lots of opportunities to think about how you'll navigate cultural difference. So again, the same questions come up for me, is about how might cultural norms and cultural identity and processes such as racism and discrimination matter in the work that you do. Important for you to think about. And how might the dogs play a part in cultural safety? And, for instance, you could introduce the dog mentioning an aspect of the therapy dog culture, like this is Annabelle, and she is full of love, and her thing is to hang with other people and dogs who really want to just be happy, whether it's in skateboarding or doing whatever. So, the dogs, I think, as you introduce the dogs, it really creates space for you to mention an aspect of culture if you feel that might be helpful in breaking the ice. And again, like with gender, ask if they wish to know more about the dog, its age, its sex, where it lives, what it likes to do, those kinds of things. Because the navigation around cultural safety can happen through the dog in many ways, and that's the magic of the work that you do. So cultural humility, a really important thing. So I'm just going to do this next section a bit around, strategies and the common strategies. What do being gender informed and culturally responsive, what do these approaches have in common that, are a part of your learning? So first of all, I just want to mention this approach to communicating called motivational interviewing. And you probably don't know about it, but it is something that a lot of service providers use, because it's about guiding people in making change. But the thing I wanted to point out for you here is that the thing that's so important and radical about it in some ways is that it has an underlying spirit to it, and it that the people who lead the motivational interviewing training talk about it's a way of being with people. And it just really struck me that the evidence from motivational interviewing is really applicable to your situation with 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 the dogs and with the people you come to work with and connect to. It's about partnership. It is about collaboration, about you exchanging things with people with respect. It is about you actually drawing out the person's reason, values, and wisdom, and to support success. And it's also a lot about you taking a non judgmental stance and really accepting and understanding that person's perspectives. So, yeah, the motivational interviewing folks really notice partnership as part of the spirit of being with, evocation, drawing out people, accepting people through highlighting strengths and respecting people's right to make choices. And compassion is really thinking about the person's welfare and well-being in a really selfless manner. It's not about us, it's about them. And the dog really creates the beautiful connection and the big smile there that really, does draw out in the most wonderful way. Now, the second thing that I think all these things about inclusion have in common is the focus on being trauma informed, about creating safety and trust and choice and connection. And, I think some of the dogs that I've seen in Pause Your Stress, like Annabelle, and the videos from the U of Sask students has just been amazing. Like, they just, in how they look, are able to create this sense of safety and connection, and you just want to know them because they're so sweet and really offer the opportunity for people to have that sense of connection. So I think, as well as that overall evocation thing, this just sitting with connection and trust and safety is so much in common in all this. And finally, you can tell I'm a big fan of Annabelle. She keeps appearing in all these pictures. But I thought with her glasses on there, she really represented the learning part of this. That really, being gender informed and culturally responsive and inclusive really requires us to be open to learning about diversity as you are today, to spend that lifetime, like the First Nations Health Authority talks about, of reflecting on our biases and being curious about others and respectful of difference. And I guess I just want to stress this last bit there about being to make mistakes and learning from them. I think that sense of humility and learning and curiosity really does require us to recognize that we're often walking into uncharted territory and with people who have very different cultures and genders to us, and we we need to just be open to it and do our best to learn and not be biased. And, when we make mistakes, to just go with it and learn from it and be ready to carry on. And I guess the dogs help there as well, because even though, um, I think you're often, when and if you do make a mistake, you can just say, well, I screwed up, but the dogs never do. They don't care, right? So it just makes the opportunity, I think, for that sense of inclusion and pulling people in to recognize there's a commonality, and that we're all learning. And, I just think that the way the First Nations Health Authority said it on the front of this document, that cultural safety means that we adopt a humble, self reflective practice that positions us as respectful and curious partners when we're connecting with the dogs, rather than as a figure of higher knowledge and authority. And that's the story of inclusion, creating that kind of safety. So when I teach about being trauma informed, I often get people to think about some sample statements that they might use to communicate this kind of an approach. And so I'm just using Laddie here as a bit of a helper in terms of us thinking about this, that you might have some statements that communicate your gender informed culturally approach ready to use in your practice. And so I often encourage people to write this down and to have it kind of ready to say, rather than being stumbling in the moment and thinking, oh, this is a moment when I should be gender informed. What did Nancy say? So here I just made a few statements, like, in creating safety around gender, you might say, well, Laddie has a boy's name, and he's everyone, boys and girls and individuals who are transgender or gender diverse. And so that might be a way of introducing Laddie. Or you could say, perhaps you'd feel more comfortable if Laddie was a bit closer or farther away or whatever. So, you can see how these creating safety, creating trustworthiness can really be something that you can be ready to communicate around gender or culture or safety in general. I use the choice and collaboration principle here to talk a bit about how you might have a statement ready about culture, because you might say something like, this may or may not work for you. You know yourself, your cultural ways best. So you've just been able to introduce a bit of idea about choice and culture and have that kind of ready to say. And, again, in terms of choice, you could be saying, you have a say in this process. You can decide whether you'd prefer that Laddie sat close to you or got up in your lap or not, or whatever you do in dog therapy protocols. So just lots of things that you could have ready. And that acknowledgement of strengths I mentioned back when we were talking about boys and men, but it applies to all genders. You could have statements ready that things like, I appreciate your ability to talk to Laddie and me and be open about it. So I just think that those are the kinds of ways in which you know, um, reflect a bit before you go into situations about how you may be proactive in that idea of working in inclusion. So that's it for me. I just wanted to come back to this idea that being gender informed and being culturally safe is a part of, wonderful practice that everybody is learning and trying to do. And these other principles are really woven into them as well, so that we're all consciously thinking about these principles.
So, as I was listening to your presentation, I have to just quickly say I have a big German Shepherd Border Collie cross, and I named him Sue after the Johnny Cash song "A Boy Named Sue." So, and what a lesson in what everything you're talking about here. It took me a couple of months to identify him as him when I said Sue, and even when I wasn't saying
Yeah.
Sue, it took me a while to stop calling him her. And I am often correcting my friends, oh, where's Sue? Where is she? He. So it's a wonderful lesson in gender identity.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, eh? I think it's a great thing that Johnny Cash did with that song.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, what you've done in terms of naming your dog that way and helping your friends correct themselves is a great chance for people to learn, right?
Hmm.
About, um, misgendering
Yeah.
is what the term is. And it can be harmful to some people, and I think that's what we have to be conscious of at this time, that Sue's
Mm.
not going to care whether you call him or her.
Yeah. No.
But people who are making that transition to being another gender may be particularly sensitive about it.
Hmm.
And they it may be really the most important thing to them. And I think whenever we join another, sort of cultural subgroup and we're really keen on it, like a hiking group or something, it becomes sort of the center of our identity for a while. And some of the other pieces of our identity kind of fall to the side. And so we have to, I think, be conscious of being accepting of the fact that people may be a bit full of that aspect of their identity for a
Hmm.
while, and we can just respect that it's a process, and
Yeah.
things swing and swing back until we find a place of peace with our identities.
Hmm. So you've been working in this field for quite some time now. If you had only one takeaway message to share with therapy dog handlers, or anyone for that matter, what would it be?
Gee, I think that basically the work of therapy dogs is such a gift
Hmm.
to all the places that you end up going to, that I think the main thing for me is just to be proud of the work that you're doing, and to come at it with that stance of it as a wonderful gift, and to not worry about being perfect, and to make the mistakes of all the people who are curious and open to new settings will make, and
Hmm.
new cultures and genders will make, and just recognize that you are doing such amazing work, and that this is um, your concern with inclusion is just one aspect of it, and to be proud of opening yourself up to this as a part of the therapy dog experience.
Hmm.
So just keep on keeping on, and enjoy the complex ride you're on.
And one last thing, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a new therapy dog handler just starting to visit in the community?
Yeah, I think that for a new person, the most important thing is to start with the awareness part. of really learning a bit about the community and the setting and, the experiences of others that have gone before you. So really start with the learner side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, integrate the inclusion side as you can. But I think it's always important to really recognize there's so many rich cultures, and that the settings that you're going into have lots to teach you.
Okay, Nancy. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll let you go. Take care.
Thanks. Bye for now. Good luck.
And that's it for me, too. My name's Daniel Hearn from Hard Knocks Talks, and we'll see you again. Take care.